Early November 1991. Garden Lodge. Freddie Mercury had not left the house in weeks by this point in his illness, his physical condition having narrowed his entire world to the specific rooms of Garden Lodge that his diminished strength still permitted him to occupy. A confinement that everyone in the household understood as simply the reality of his condition, rather than any choice that might have been otherwise. Jim Hutton has described, in the limited interviews he gave before his own death in 2010, a specific afternoon during this period when Freddie asked him, with what Jim has characterized as unusual and deliberate intensity, whether it might be possible to leave the house, just briefly, just once more, for a destination Freddie apparently had in mind, but had not yet specified. Jim has said that his immediate reaction involved genuine concern about whether Freddie's body could actually tolerate the strain of leaving the controlled environment of the house, the specific temperature regulation, the immediate access to medication and care that Garden Lodge provided, weighed against Freddie's evident and unusually forceful desire to make this particular trip regardless of the physical cost it might require. Freddie, according to Jim's account, acknowledged the risk directly, offering, in Jim's characterization, a specific and somewhat startling clarity about his own physical limitations that Jim has said struck him as uncharacteristic of how Freddie typically discussed his condition, generally preferring across most of his final months to minimize or deflect direct conversation about the specific severity of his decline. He said something like, "I know what this might cost me, and I've decided I don't care." Jim has recounted, according to the version of this account, that has appeared most consistently across the limited testimony he offered before his death. He said there was somewhere he needed to see one more time, and that if it meant he had a harder few days afterward, that was a trade he was willing to make. Jim has described asking Freddie directly where he wanted to go, expecting, based on his understanding of Freddie's general preferences and history, that the destination might involve somewhere connected to the band's history, a studio, a venue, some location tied to the professional achievements that had defined so much of Freddie's public life. What Freddie actually named, according to Jim's account, surprised him considerably, a specific and relatively modest location that Jim has described as carrying no obvious connection to Freddie's career or public identity, a detail that Jim has said initially confused him before Freddie offered a brief explanation that Jim has characterized across every version of the account he gave as one of the more quietly moving things Freddie said to him across their entire 6 years together. The specific destination Freddie named has never been precisely confirmed through any source willing to speak with sufficient authority to settle the question definitively, Jim having offered only general characterizations of the location across his limited testimony rather than a specific address or clearly identifiable landmark. A discretion that researchers who have studied this fragment of testimony have suggested may reflect Jim's own deliberate choice to protect this particular detail with the same careful discretion he extended to several other pieces of private testimony from Freddie's final months. What Jim has confirmed, with reasonable consistency across the interviews where this trip has come up, is that the location involves somewhere from earlier in Freddie's life, predating his fame considerably, a place Jim has characterized in general terms as connected to Freddie's specific memories of a period before Queen existed, before the persona and the performances and the enormous scale of his eventual career had transformed his life into something the young man who had once frequented this particular location could scarcely have imagined. Jim has said that arranging the actual trip required careful planning across the following day, coordinating with Freddie's doctors to ensure appropriate medication timing, preparing the car with whatever specific accommodations Freddie's physical condition required, and choosing a specific time of day, according to Jim's account, when traffic and public visibility would be minimized. Understanding that even a brief public appearance carried genuine risk given both Freddie's physical fragility and the ongoing paparazzi attention that had characterized much of his final year. The trip itself, according to Jim's limited account, occurred on a weekday morning, chosen specifically for its lower likelihood of significant public presence. Jim driving while Freddie rode in the passenger seat wrapped, according to Jim's description, in blankets and supported by cushions, arranged to minimize the physical strain of even a relatively brief car journey. Jim has described Freddie's mood during the drive itself as notably lighter than it had been across much of the preceding weeks. A specific and visible lift in his spirits that Jim has attributed directly to the simple experience of being outside the house after such an extended period of confinement, watching ordinary London streets pass by the car window with what Jim has characterized as genuine and almost childlike appreciation for details that most people would never think twice about. The specific color of autumn leaves, the ordinary activity of people going about unremarkable daily business, small sensory experiences that Jim has said Freddie seemed to be absorbing with unusual intensity, as though understanding, without either man needing to say it directly, that this brief drive represented something considerably more significant than an ordinary outing. Upon arrival at the destination, according to Jim's account, Freddie asked to remain in the car for several minutes before attempting to exit, taking time, according to Jim's characterization, simply to look at whatever the location actually was. A period of quiet observation that Jim has described respecting without asking questions. Understanding that this particular moment belonged entirely to Freddie's own private processing, rather than requiring any input or commentary from him. When Freddie did eventually indicate he wanted to exit the car, Jim has described assisting him with considerable physical support. The walk from the car to wherever the specific destination point actually was requiring, according to Jim's account. Careful and slow movement that nonetheless, Freddie insisted on undertaking largely under his own power rather than accepting a wheelchair or more extensive physical assistance that Jim has indicated he had brought along in case it proved necessary. He wanted to walk there himself, Jim has said, according to the account that has proven most consistent across his limited testimony. Even though it clearly cost him something, even though I could see how much effort it was taking, he wanted his own legs to carry him those last few steps, and I understood, without him explaining it, that this specific detail mattered to him in a way I probably couldn't fully appreciate. Something about arriving there as himself, under his own power, rather than being brought there like a patient. The specific duration of Freddie's time at the actual destination has been characterized by Jim, across the limited testimony available, as relatively brief, perhaps 15 to 20 minutes total. Though Jim has said this brief window contained what he described as a kind of quiet, private ceremony that he witnessed without fully understanding its complete significance, Freddie apparently engaging in some specific and deliberate act of acknowledgment or farewell connected to the location that Jim has never precisely detailed in any account he offered before his own death. Jim has said that Freddie did not cry during this time, maintaining instead what Jim characterized as a specific and somewhat unexpected calm, a quality Jim has connected to his broader understanding of how Freddie approached the various pieces of unfinished personal business he apparently addressed across his final months. A pattern of quiet, deliberate closure rather than dramatic emotional expression. Consistent with several other documented accounts from this general period of Freddie's life. The return drive to Garden Lodge, according to Jim's account, occurred largely in comfortable silence, Freddie apparently satisfied and settled following whatever specific experience the destination had provided him. A marked contrast to the visible anticipation and unusual intensity that had characterized his mood in the days leading up to the trip. Freddie's physical condition did, according to Jim's account, decline noticeably in the days immediately following this excursion, confirming the specific risk that both men had understood and accepted before undertaking the trip. A period of several days during which Freddie required additional rest and experienced what Jim characterized as a specific and temporary intensification of his usual symptoms, though Jim has said, across every account he gave, that he never once heard Freddie express regret about having made the trip despite its evident physical cost. "He told me it was worth it," Jim has recounted, in the version of this account that has appeared most consistently. "He said some things are worth spending yourself on, even when spending yourself on them costs more than you can really afford, and that he'd rather have those few extra difficult days afterward than never have gone at all." This particular characterization of Freddie's own reasoning, weighing the genuine physical cost against a specific and apparently profound personal significance he attached to the visit, has been cited by people who study this fragment of testimony as consistent with a broader pattern documented across several other accounts from Freddie's final months: a repeated willingness to accept genuine physical risk or discomfort in service of specific, carefully chosen final experiences or acknowledgments that he apparently judged worth whatever cost they required. The specific identity and location of this destination has never been confirmed through any source beyond Jim Hutton's own limited and deliberately general testimony, and researchers who have attempted to identify it more precisely have generally concluded that Jim's discretion regarding this detail was likely deliberate. A final protection extended to a place and an experience that Freddie had apparently wanted to keep private, even in the act of finally revisiting it one last time. Jim Hutton died in January 2010 without, as far as any available record indicates, ever more precisely specifying this location to any interviewer or in his own published memoir, Maintaining. Across the nearly 19 years between this particular trip and his own death, the same careful discretion he extended to several other pieces of private testimony from Freddie's final months. Understanding, according to the broader pattern of his own documented approach to Freddie's memory, that some experiences belonged entirely to the two of them, and to whatever specific significance the actual location held for Freddie personally, a significance that neither man apparently felt required or benefited from broader public disclosure or speculation, leaving this final and quietly significant excursion as one more carefully protected piece of testimony from the final weeks of a man who, even while managing the genuine physical costs of his own approaching death, remained determined to spend whatever strength he had left on the specific things and places that had actually mattered to him across an entire lifetime that extended considerably further back than the fame the world had come to know him for.